Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. First, I'd like to share with you a product that was created called the Empathy Ring to connect each and every one of us who has gone through a loss. How do you connect with a passing stranger? In losing someone you love through pregnancy loss, death of a child, a sibling, a spouse, a parent, you have been initiated into a club of which no one wants to be a member. By wearing this ring in the color you choose, you'll be connected to a community of people who have experienced the same loss as you. With this concrete visual, you'll be able to easily identify others who understand what you've been through and can offer the support of the lost community. Come find your ring and your connection. Shop now at KalilaGreenspeaker.com. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Corinne. We just met. I feel like I say that a lot. A lot of my guests, I'm like, I just met and I connected with you automatically. And I'm so excited that you're here. So thank you so much for reaching out and thank you so much for being here.
It's poetic. When I went to schedule this interview, the only day that you had left was today. And today happens to be what would have been my brother's 54th birthday.
Oh, well, happy birthday to your brother. I'm so honored to share the day with him then.
Yeah, so it was like, oh, this was definitely meant to be that I would come and talk about grief on
Amazing. I
what would
mean,
have been
not
his
amazing
birthday.
to
So
talk about grief, but amazing that you can be here today. So when we had first spoken, you had mentioned that you can speak about pregnancy loss, but really the topic of grief in general and of loss and of really working through how to live after the person is gone is where your specialty lies, unfortunately. Death is part of life, but sometimes we experience it more often than others.
yes, I have had many profound losses in my family. The first loss that I really felt hit really the hardest was the loss of my best friend's little girl. She had turned 2 on April, and on April 3rd, she died. And I was kind of in that point where I was being that pillar of strength for my friend as we were in the hospital and helping wash her hair and knowing that, they were going to take her off life support. She had asked me when they took her off life support if I would sit with her and rock her.
Oh,
And then we started to sing songs that just had, like the word grace, and I still can't sing Amazing Grace without breaking down. But yeah, so that was my first real big where I was old, obviously old enough to understand and the loss of a child. I happened to be pregnant at the time, and I remember calling home and saying to my dad, I was like, I was kind of all over the place with my emotions and thinking, I can't, how can I think about having a baby and be happy when Pippi is losing Hannah. And, my dad was like that, because I'm like, if I have this baby, does that mean Hannah's going to die? And, he was like, the way it works, that's not the way it works. And I ended up losing that baby.
wow.
I think that from stress alone, just the whole process, but I ended up miscarrying that baby. And that really started that cycle of healing and kind of understanding this grief, the grief with her, the grief I was feeling at the same time, and wanting to find out like why, like why do these things happen? The next thing was I lost my dad. So I lost my dad 17 years. So it was in October of 2006, October 4th, 2006. I lost my dad, and that was 9 days. He was 59.
Wow.
And the end result of that was he was bleeding internally, liver failure, long-term alcohol abuse was the end result, even though a fall is what initiated the bleeding. So with the loss of him, I like burst out the ICU doors. I was like running down the hallway. I'm sobbing and like complete grief. And who do you talk to about that? And we happened to be at a Christian-based hospital, and I turned the corner and I literally ran right into this nun. And she like took me by my shoulders and she's like, "Oh, child, what can I do for you?" And I'm like, I don't know who I am without my dad. And even though there was so much chaos in my life with him in it, her advice to me was to take the good forward, right? To take the good things about him. And how could I take that out into society? And so I did exactly that. My dad was, a troubled youth, and I was like, how can I pay that forward? So I began working within a school district with emotionally, what they considered emotionally disabled children. um,
Wow.
High school students is really what it was. Working with them and really having that ability to connect and see them for who they were, because I was them. Like, I knew what it was like to grow up. I could see that didn't eat, the kids that were up all night because somebody kept them up, how their basic needs weren't being provided for. So that was him.
Wow.
And my brother 5 years later. So that was a sucker punch because my brother was 41, had struggled with some mental health issues. And, I remember driving down the road. It was a beautiful fall day and I had my son in the car, and my sister, called and said, he's dead. And I did not, obviously, I didn't know where, like, that came out of left field. And that took a bit more to be able to come to terms with that because he was only 41. What happened with him is he died from an overdose of and alcohol. So that's ultimately, after, digging into it, I started looking at, like, why do people abuse substance? Why did dad? Why did Scott? What was really going on there? And so I started to learn about things like childhood trauma, what that does to our brain, what it does to our body, really learning about substance abuse, and then taking that and moving that forward as well with working with my students. How do I apply that? And, fast forward, I watched my mom grieve so much to the point of very like self-loathing,
Mm.
really, where she blamed herself, that she should have done more, she could have done more. She had a priest tell her not do enough. um
Oh, that is a horrible thing to tell someone.
yeah, yeah. And she really internalized that, right? She really took that to heart because as a mom, and right, there is just nothing you wouldn't do for your babies. Like, when they talk about that strength, right, that you could pick up a car, like, I know that strength, right? Like,
100%.
clearing up. And so I kind of watched the light fade from her,
Mm.
the joy. And so the years went by, and the friend that I was talking about at the beginning here, she had cancer. And 2 years ago, so 2021 was a real kicker for me. So in 2021, I lost that friend to breast cancer.
Wow.
And what I didn't know is it was preparing me for my mom.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my bestie died in August, and in October, the actual date of the anniversary of my dad's death, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had
Wow.
metastasized to her liver.
Wow.
And yes, that got me. I really started to digging into, again, the body, the things, how this affected. The pancreas is the organ that, if you're familiar with chakras and chakra-based healing, the pancreas is in the joy section. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, and then I also learned, because I am a science bug, I love to learn about science in the human body. When I was researching pancreatic cancer and looking for all the best treatments for mom and what to do and could we do, I went to John Hopkins because to me that's like the best of the best, and found that it takes 10 years for pancreatic cancer to metastasize and then ultimately so split off and go into other organs. And my mom died almost exactly 2 years after, or not, excuse, I'm sorry, 10 years after my brother died.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it was kind of or I should say, she was diagnosed. She was diagnosed on October 4th. My brother had died on October 28th, and it had been 10 years since
Right.
he. And so I started looking at all of that, right? What do you do with all of that? What do you do with all this grief? Really sent me on a deep spiritual journey. I had been with them like with my dad, with my best friend, with my mom when they passed. I did not have that privilege with my brother because he died alone in his sleep. But I know energy cannot be created or destroyed. So therefore, that energy within the body goes somewhere. I really
Hmm.
started digging into this, right? And I refer to it as the soul. And then I started learning about how each soul has, a journey. We're here, we kind of sign up for things ahead of time. And so, based on where people are at and what they believe, I opened myself up to different ways to see things. And we talked about that perception. I was able to say, oh, what if this? You know, coming from a Christian background, believing that Jesus was all love and light, knowing Jesus the Christ is the crystalline light. I was saying, okay, like how can I take this and how can I apply this into my life? And it was a beautiful journey, feeling that intense grief to taking it to an understanding of what I it was to learn my family of origin. And I consider my bestie one of them because there was no doubt that she was part of that. We were friends for 38 years. And it was like each one of them had a profound thing that they could teach me. And when it came to my mom, I knew I had been on a retreat, I had meditated, and I had what I would call a divine download that I knew that I was to be the one to walk my mom home. And
Wow.
this was 4 months before her diagnosis. So when it came, as much as it was gut wrenching, kind of pulled myself up by my bootstraps and was like, okay, you got to be here for mom, because my sister lived with her and was way too close to the fire. And
Hmm.
so I'm going to take her to the appointments. I'm going to be the level headed one and allow the grief, right? So there's so much as far as like what I learned and what I can take away from it. So I'm gonna pause for a second and let you ask questions because I can say all kinds of stuff.
Well, I think the first thing that struck me is the difference between your experience when your dad passed away and when your brother passed away with your mom, and how I'm Jewish, and so we have rabbis, and I don't know that I've ever spoken to a priest or to a nun, but to hear the difference in how one related to you versus one related to your mom, I feel like set you both on two very different paths. And
Mm,
it could
mm,
have been received so differently in
mhm,
either form.
mhm,
To me, everything happens for a reason. And when you speak about religion and energy, it's totally my language. But those two things right there are exactly that in embodiment, right? It's such an interesting point to look at that dichotomy of reactions.
mm. And I think things go to all of it. I kept educating myself.
Mhm.
Like I said, I have a thirst for science, for just the understanding. And I love to read, as you can see the books behind me. I mean, those are all resources for what I do. But it's like, how do you take the grief that you're feeling and how do you do something with it? Because we have really what I see two choices. It can consume me or it can be empowerment, right? It
Yep.
can be that wind beneath my wings. It moves me forward and says, like, let's make a change. Let's see this different. And our lives really taught me it can be different. So, I grew up in poverty. Like I said, I had teenage parents. The list is long, but with a short and condensed version of that is grew up with childhood trauma, not due to mom, due to dad. But that changes a child. And so me learning about that, I was like, I'm gonna break this cycle. So you hear that, right? You hear people talking about breaking the cycle. And I have written on my whiteboard back there, are you going to continue to be a link in the chain, or are you going to break it? And I chose to break it,
Hmm.
right? To have an understanding, to be very open with our children about the different things, to talk about mental wellness. what does that look like? To talk about emotional wellness, right? Because when we understand our emotions, we know how we have that ability then to choose something different before it takes a hold of us.
Right.
That's a really big piece. And being able to have that emotional intelligence is probably what helped steer me in a different direction, to not internalize. Probably easier for me to not internalize what was happening to dad. The same with mom, right? To not internalize that, as opposed to our, because Scott was struggling mentally, right? And you want to help the people that you love so much, but in the end, it's a you and you deal. It really comes down to having the wherewithal to help yourself, which can be really difficult because as a mama, you look at your babies and if they're struggling, you're going to move heaven and earth,
Right.
right? So you're going to just do what you can
Right.
to be able to help. And but mom, she did what she could, and we all did, and obviously processed that portion of the grief a little differently. So very interesting. But thank you for like pointing that out too, because it's not something I really take a look at.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting to see how other people visualize their own stories because everybody has an internal truth. And I always say this to my husband whenever we get into a fight and we're miscommunicating with each other, I'm like, look, however we see things, your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth, but we need to meet in the middle somewhere. And I
Mhm.
think that being able to understand that your truth is that you took this opportunity and said, I can either wallow for the rest of my life and never get out of this and become sick and become
Mhm.
helpless to other people, or I can take everything I've learned and not only make myself into somebody who can thrive, but also teach other people to be able to take their circumstances and not let that define who they are.
Absolutely. In the beginning, it was easy to fall into the victim role, to be
Right,
like, oh, this, all these things happened to me, and including the childhood trauma, and including all of the things that happened throughout my life. And then as
right,
I started to look at it, it was like, well, they can happen to me, or they can happen through me.
right,
Right. I can take all of that and collect it. And what do I do with it?
right, right. I
And
always say I can't change the past, but I can change my outlook on it.
yeah, absolutely. Right. The rearview mirror, it gets to be what you want to see. And after time, I think it is, right? Because we do have, as human beings, we tend to generalize, delete, and distort information anyways. It's the way the brain works. We
Right,
have mechanisms that, kind of lead us to the negative, and then we have to take the choice to, in say leading to us to the negative, it's simply that our bodies are hardwired to recognize danger.
right,
Saved us when we were cavemen, and now we don't necessarily have dinosaurs or saber-toothed tigers, lurking around the corner.
right,
It's still, our body still has those built-in mechanisms that can be triggered in various different ways. And all of these things, all of the things I've learned along the way have really been, I attribute it all to my soul family, that they have been the wind beneath my wings to move me forward, and then to give me that ability to go out and say, you too can change your life, you too can have a different lens for things, and that we have that power within us. I my belief really is that from an energetic perspective, I'm indirectly into my source, God, universe, source, call them Gus, whatever whatever,
I love that.
so I plug directly in, and then we, like a matrix, plug into each other. And that it's important that I sit and contemplate and reflect and plug in and listen to that
Mhm.
source, listen to that internal guidance. And, I can say that, as far as grief, I've had a mental health breakdown myself. It was over 20 years ago. And I sat on a bathroom floor thinking about taking my life. And what I did was I listened to that little voice in me, and often we can dismiss that.
Mhm.
And that voice too in your grief is in there saying, there is something good that can come of this.
Mhm.
you see it, right? With like, look at you, this podcast to bring information to people. People take the loss of their children. Even, when I was talking about my best friend's little girl, what I learned from that as a mom was that when kids had the flu, I mean, because immediately I was talking to my pediatrician, what does it take for a child to not dehydrate?
Hmm.
That's ultimately what happened. She had the flu really bad, coming out both
Wow.
ways, and she dehydrated, which caused the body then to shut itself down.
Right.
And there was a lot that went into that with the hospital system and them not admitting her, and they should have, and all of that. But I said, what do I need to do? And he said, a teaspoon of water every 15 minutes. And have the child keep that down, right? Because a teaspoon isn't enough where they're not going to, it's not going to make them vomit, but
Right.
it's will keep them. 4 teaspoons of water an hour would keep them from dehydrating. And so I was vigilant with that. I learned that, this is a really big deal.
Hmm.
Um, I was blessed enough where I could say, um, not going to work today. I'm staying home with my sick babies. And that means more to me than, going to work. And, sometimes people aren't, blessed with that choice. But for me, I would be like, fire me then,
Right.
uh, I'll figure it out later. Oh, but that, right. Can you see the gift inside of there? And the word gift can be kind of crunchy sometimes, but can you see maybe the light inside of there? Can you see
Hmm.
the lesson, the whatever it is that you want to call it, that their life, because I think I don't want their life to be in vain, right? Their death, right? Because it's like I want something that they're remembered for. And if that thing is that it propelled me to, launch into a career where I, as a transformation and healing strategist, and I can look at, other human being and all the lessons that I learned along the way and guide them
Hmm.
to their internal truth, like you said, then look at what a beautiful way to memorialize every single one of them.
Right. And I think that even the baby that you lost has a piece of that, right? Where people say sometimes, and I know you said it and you might not have
Yeah.
realized you said it, that you had an early miscarriage. So you haven't had my experience. But there are people that I met in this journey that have had an ectopic pregnancy, and that baby affected them just as much as somebody who has a stillborn or a baby who they lost at 1 or 2 or 3 years old. So it's all in what I've learned is that grief is in the loss of what you no longer have and what that dream was that you can now no longer live. And I think that if you can recognize what that loss is, what that grief is, it still stays with you. But as you process it, it can teach you, it can guide you, and it doesn't have to be that pain and suffering that you experience. It can be just that you remember that person or that baby or whatever, whoever it was that has now taken you in the direction that you are.
Yeah, oh, that's so beautiful. And just so true. It's can be what you need it to be, and really not looking at it. Because I think when a woman has, miscarriage in a very early in the pregnancy or in a one, like no one else really knew, right? No one else really knew they were pregnant other than their partner. And then you're kind of walking through the world and you can feel like you're alone.
Right.
And it can feel like, here's this grief, but yet I can take it and look at it and use it in a good positive light and say, it's here, it's with me, it's always going to be here. We do a thing in the Neuroencoding Institute, which neuroencoding is one of the techniques, one of the tools, if you will, that I use in coaching. And it's called polishing the memories. And so it's not that, because I allow myself to grieve.
Mm.
What I do is I polish my memories. I take them out. I find the things that made me happy. Instead of remembering the way that they died, I remember the way that they lived.
Hmm.
And that has just been so incredibly helpful, especially with mom, because, shortly, probably less, let's see, my kids left on Sunday. My mom died on Saturday. So, less than a week before she died, two of my kids were They live in LA. And they just had, I mean, they had her in hysterics, right? She's laughing so hard, she's crying, she's just, and it's just such a beautiful sight and a beautiful sound. And so when I start to feel really sad, I allow myself to feel the grief with, and I think of her and I think, watch out for Fanny, because I mean that my son's butt was hitting something, and as he's bending down to try to give my mom a hug, and then he's like, "What for Fanny?" And then she laughed and laughed, and so I think of that. It brings me to laughing and having a big smile and remembering how much she loved to laugh and how much she enjoyed being with my children, and that just there it is. It's polished up for me.
Hmm.
The same thing with my brother. My brother did the best Eddie Murphy impression that I have ever seen anybody do. And so I think of him, doing that.
Right.
Uh, Dad, was very crafty. He was a craftsman, but he loved to do little things like macrame, and he loved nature. And so when I'm doing those sort of things, um, I smile and I remember the good.
Right. I love that. There's somebody who I lost I was very close with, and whenever my kids would go over to their house, they would always take out whipped cream, and I think the refrigerator always had whipped cream in it. Like I don't remember a time when I went over and there wasn't. And he would take the whipped cream can and he would always spray it into their mouth. And I remember the first time he did it for my daughter, she looked at me like, it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. Is that okay? I'm like, no, it's okay. Like it's a thing. Don't worry. We've all been there and you'll get it next time too. And then a few weeks ago, there was a whipped cream can on a table at a party that I was at, and I was like, okay, I mean, that is a clear sign that this person is saying hello and that I need to take it and spray it into my mouth. Like I'm sorry for anybody else who is witnessing this, but there is no other thing that I can do right now. And when I told the person about it, they said that was so him and that was so true. And they appreciate how these stories bring the person and they keep them here in a way.
The mere fact, I have chills moving through my body, which is definitely spirit moving through me. My brother did the same thing when he turned a big party for him, turned 30, and got him a can of whipped cream because when we were kids, mom always bought two for the holiday. She
One
would
for him.
Yeah, she would hide him. She would leave one out because he would inevitably open it, and so that became the big thing. And my would do the same thing to our kids, as he would spray it in their mouth. And I actually when I worked for a high school, like I said, 15 years, and I brought a can one time to spray in their mouths just to remember because it was like, here's what we're going to do today.
Yep,
Uh, so it's just, he's here. I feel it because
totally.
it's his birthday, and you're talking about whipped cream.
Totally. I was actually just going to ask you,
Mm.
because you feel more connected and because of all the work that you've done, do you think that you're able to then see and feel different messages from them, or do you think that you just can feel that in general?
Well, I definitely have opened myself up.
Mhm.
So, from a energetic perspective, to allow myself to receive that in,
Mhm.
we, if we close ourselves off, that it can be difficult because then they can't communicate with you. But
Mhm.
the synchronicities alone, there's just too many. Well, you can call it some people call it a God instance, some people call it a coincidence, some people call it sync. Mom called them God winks.
I love that term.
She called it a God wink. And there can be things where, we as a species give everything meaning. We're the one that gives it meaning.
Mhm.
And I take, like I said, the fact that this was the only date that you had open was, I was definitely meant to be here. Now, the mere fact that you're talking about whipped cream as one of your way, um, I mean, come on, what are the odds? I mean,
Right.
it's very it's very slim when you look at odds as far as aligning us to be together for a specific reason. Well, that goes into a whole lot of soul contract stuff that that I don't have enough time to get into today.
Right.
But it really goes to me anyways, into that I opened that pathway.
Mhm.
Can see it a little different, and taking a step back and and seeing things. I love the science perspective, and I love the fact that I separate spirituality from religion. So I look at it from, we might call it something different,
Hmm.
but essentially what's happening is we all believe in the same thing,
Hmm.
and with that being of love and light, that we're to be here, to help elevate each other, to take that soul to the next level, to really ultimately seek enlightenment, and that being the highest form. And
Hmm.
when we can open our awareness up enough where I'm not following what everybody else believes, but I'm listening to that little voice inside of me.
Hmm.
It took every single one of those people to be gone for me to really to take in that gift of and being able to see it for what it
Hmm.
is. That so yes. I think
I
yeah,
could
go
sit
ahead.
here. I think I could talk to you for hours, but we definitely have a short amount of time left. But if you could, in all of the things that you've learned or that you've taught to your students and to the people that you work with, what do you think would be the key, I guess, top thing that you would take away to say, if in going through grief, pushing through it to thrive on the other side, this is what's most important?
The most important thing is that the people that you love that you lost would want you to continue on and to be happy. They would want that for you. I know that to be true. Even when I say it, it tingles through my body. And so that's what I want people to hear, is that in that loss, there, right? Because the law of polarity comes in here, right?
Hmm.
In the loss, there, right, there's an equal and opposite, right? So if I lose something and I lose someone I love, then there's a gain in there. In to hang on to that, it can get pretty cloudy when in a deep grief. When grief begins to subside too, is when your ability to connect with the energy of the lost loved one opens up. When you're in a
Hmm.
deep grief, they just can't, because from a vibrational standpoint, it's too compact for them to be able to access you. So that's what I would say. Just, keep in mind the polarity there, right? Like the
Hmm.
law, there's something there for you. I use the check, if you open the hood, right? If you pop the hood of the car, it's easier to take a good look at what's going on the inside of it than it is to keep it closed. So keep yourself open.
I love that. And I love that there's so many different tools out there that you don't have to know anything about quantum physics. You don't have to know anything about energy. You don't have to know anything about frequencies and tones or whatever it is. And it can guide you. And either there's specific programs that you can look into, or there's coaches like yourself that you can contact, or there's different ways to sort of equal out the vibrations of everything around you and inside of you to maybe open that up and welcome those messages. I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are, I believe, right, what speaks to you. Go with that gut instinct. We have a tendency to seek externally, right? We look to other people for the answer,
Hmm.
help me, help me, help me. Look inside, sit with that.
Hmm.
And those answers that come to you, the first hit, right? Because what we do is we get this answer, which is really a divine answer, and then we go, "Really? What do you think? What do you think?" And then we're in our ego brain, and it's like, you know, now I've opinion polled everyone, and I've clouded up what I really believe. But if I do that, if I sit inside, journal it out. I love to journal and write. Just let it free flow. You don't have to follow a prompt. It doesn't have to be beautifully written or scripted or anything. Just allow what naturally flows through you.
Hmm.
And at the end of your journaling, ask yourself, is there anything else? Is there anything else? Because
Hmm.
with question, sometimes is where that last little piece comes out, is where, there's your little nugget of gold. Ah, there it is. So yeah, I just there's so much that you can do, so many different people that you could seek, but truly we're guides. That's why I call myself a strategist. It's I'm simply a guide to help you see past blind spots, to get to your internal answers, to bring the healing about that you desire. I don't like to use the word need because it sounds so harsh, but we desire, right? We desire to heal,
Hmm.
you know, to feel the joy again and the happiness, and it's possible. It really is. I mean, I tell people all the time, I am living proof, that we can survive a lot,
Yeah.
really can.
And I think just the opposite of that, that even if you haven't had a traumatic childhood, there's still things that are traumatic and there's still things that affect you very deeply. And that's okay. And there are ways to work through that.
Yeah. And so, with difference, right? Okay. Like your traumatic childhood really, it internally, it wired me a little bit different,
Mhm.
wired my different, right? But trauma in and of itself, that you have what they say are big T's or little T's, a grief, the loss of, someone you love, especially the loss of a child, loss of a spouse. Those are big T's.
Mhm.
Those are T's. And those require assistance, right? It require that extra person to help you along through that grief process. I know so many people that think they got to muscle through things alone, right? You got to tough it out, right? There's a lot of negative connotation to seeking therapy. If I go see a therapist, especially as a male, that somehow is a sign of weakness. And to me, there is truly no greater sign of strength than a man willing to go through therapy to say, raise his hand and say, I need help too.
Mhm.
There's just, I there's no need to go it alone. We get to have somebody walk that journey with us, and especially through those early stages of the grief when you're blaming, right? Internally blaming, seeking revenge against yourself. Um, the body is amazing in what it will hold, and we tend to do that. We look in the mirror and go, well, it's got to be your fault.
Right.
I've done something. So let that person help, let somebody walk with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I love that. I think that's a perfect way to end. And for anybody who would like to reach out, where can people find you?
www.CorinneZuleger.com. So CorinneZuleger.com. You can find me on Instagram too, but my website's a good place to connect.
Perfect. I will put that in the show notes. And I so appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom and sharing your stories and your experience. It means the world that I can give this gift to other people.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's conversation, please leave me a review and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.